Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing all things The Lion King. And this is my second favorite Disney movie after Aladdin, because I just love Aladdin so much. But this movie is not only one of the greatest Disney movies, but one of the greatest animated movies of all time. And the irony was that at the time, animators had wanted to work on Pocahontas because executives were pushing for that movie to be Disney's next big movie. But then when this movie came out, it was just a colossal hit. And here we are 25 years later, and now we have the CGI remake. And everyone, myself included, was skeptical when it was announced a few years ago that Disney would be doing a quote-unquote live-action retelling of The Lion King, because the original is an absolute masterpiece, and you don't mess with greatness or perfection, you just leave it alone. But, of course, the nostalgia and just remakes, easy money, so Disney just is remaking all of their classic animated features. I remember actually half joking on Twitter saying, oh, are they going to do Lilo and Stitch next? And turns out they are. There's also going to be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Little Mermaid. There's been controversy about that, which is just so ridiculous and so stupid. And this year, so far, we had Dumbo and Aladdin, which I haven't seen because I just love the animated version so much. I just had no desire to see the remake. And Mulan will be coming up next year in 2020. Just going down the line of all the classic animated films. But The Lion King is right in the center of the Disney Renaissance era from 89 to 99, starting with The Little Mermaid and ending with Tarzan. Just all of those movies in that era are considered classics, and those are really the ones that I grew up with in the 90s, late 90s. And this one actually came out when my brother was born. And everyone, I'm sure everyone at some point, you've held up your cat or whatever, stuffed animal, or you're holding up your kid just like Simba because it's just so majestic. So much about this movie is absolutely iconic. And Circle of Life is just such a gorgeous song. And originally they were going to have dialogue, but then they just scrapped it and just went with the song. And to this day, I consider it one of the greatest movie openings ever. Just showing all the animals, the beauty, that blazing sun rising against the orange sky. Just gorgeous imagery. Showing us Pride Rock. And baby Simba is just the cutest little thing. Oh my gosh. And just the score in this movie, all of those songs are so absolutely gorgeous, composed by Hans Zimmer. I love it so much. And obviously I don't need to sit here and recap The Lion King to you, so I'll just kind of share some of my favorite moments. And I have to say, so, growing up, the part I've seen the most of this movie, undoubtedly I would say, is I Just Can't Wait to Be King. And everyone seems to really love, for obvious reasons, they love Hakuna Matata. And I love that song too, but just something about I Just Can't Wait to Be King. It's just so joyful and colorful, the way all the background colors change when Simba says, not the way I see it, and then he just slams down in front of Zazu and just kicks into the song. And the fact that the whole purpose of the song is to distract Zazu, I find that so brilliant. And then afterwards, Nala's saying, hey, genius, it was my idea. It's just so great. I love the whole back and forth, too. No one's saying do this. Now, when I said that, no one's saying be there. What I meant was, no one's saying stop that. Now, what you don't realize, no one's saying see here, now see here. I love it. I love Zazu. I would say Zazu, definitely top 3 favorite character for me. I love Timon. Just his sass is fantastic. But of course, Timon and Pumbaa, they're a duo. You can't have one without the other. But I love him. I love Zazu because he's just so loyal as the king's major domo. Just the king's right-wing man. And then I love Scar. Just such a truly ruthless villain. The fact that he kills his own brother and would have killed his own nephew. And of course, the whole thing with this movie, it's a parallel with Shakespeare's Hamlet, with killing the king because he wants to be in power. And then, of course, there's also the controversy with this movie that they took it from that old cartoon. It was Kimba the lion. But, so back to my love for Zazu. I don't know. Voiced by, in the original, Rowan Atkinson, who is Mr. Bean, if you've ever seen that show at all. And Mr. Bean doesn't talk, but Zazu's a great character. I just love his delivery. Sorry to bust your bubble, just that enunciation. With an attitude like that, you're shaping up to be a pretty pathetic king indeed. And then this song, Just Can't Wait to Be King, just such a showstopper. I love it so much. And I think the reason I've seen this specific scene so many times, definitely, is because when I was younger, we had a VHS tape of just Disney sing-alongs, and Part of Your World was on it from The Little Mermaid, and this song was on it. I just remember sitting and watching it, and I was so young, I couldn't even read yet, reading the lyrics on screen, but I would just be mesmerized by all the colors. Just such a joyful, fun song. And my favorite part is just, "Not yet." I love that from Zazu. And the fact that, since it's animated, you have all the really dynamic expressions and that they use their paws as hands. And it's just all the details in this movie. It's just such a brilliant movie. Of course, James Earl Jones as Mufasa is absolutely iconic. And Scar is just awful. Simba, it's to die for. So chilling, his delivery, Jeremy Irons, and his song, Be Prepared. I would say the greatest Disney villain song, hands down. You won't get a sniff without me. And actually, after that part of the song, that's when Jim Cummings took over, because Jeremy Irons had blown his vocal cords or whatever, so he couldn't finish the song. So then the rest of the song gets sung by Jim Cummings. And he voices Ed, the crazy hyena. And then Shenzi is voiced by Whoopi Goldberg. And Bonsai, I think that's his name, voiced by Cheech Marin. And the bond with Simba and Mufasa, I love that too. I love also the imagery when, after Mufasa saves them from the elephant graveyard with the hyenas, and then he's scolding Simba, "You deliberately disobeyed me." And when Simba walks up to him and he steps into his paw print, just his small paw print looking at his dad's big paw print, the symbolism there, how he's got big, quote-unquote, paws to fill, big shoes to fill. Just he's not there yet. He has to grow, literally, but he has to learn. He's still naive. He's still young. And I've always loved young Simba more than adult Simba. I guess because I was a kid, you relate more to a kid. But even now, it's just such a classic. And then, forget it, that freaking scene when Mufasa dies. Every single time I've cried. The most recent time I saw this movie, before now for this episode of this podcast, but before that was a few months ago, actually, on a plane. And as I was watching, I was telling myself, as if I could control this, like, okay, I'm not going to cry. I've seen this movie so many times. I don't need to cry this time during Mufasa's death. And then I was doing okay. I was like, okay, I'm not crying. It's all fine. Yeah, I've seen this so many times. It's okay. But then the part when Simba snuggles up to Mufasa, I just broke down, tears streaming down my face. Oh my gosh, it's so heart-wrenching. And the music. And then just Scar, what will your mother think? Oh, terrible. Run away, Simba, and never return. Oof. So chilling, so awful. The sheer lies from Scar, so utterly ruthless. And then, of course, the one and only Timon and Pumbaa, when they just come charging into the scene, running and screaming, warding off those vultures. Their dynamic is just fantastic, voiced by Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella. I do love Pumbaa, too. I mean, he's kind of the dumber one between him and Timon. Like when Timon says, "Who's the brains?" My point exactly. And I love, he looks blue. I'd say brownish gold. No, I mean, he's depressed. And they teach him about Hakuna Matata. Hakuna Matata. What a wonderful phrase. Such a fun song. No worries. But then, of course, with no worries, eventually you can't always be running from your problems and your responsibilities. It'll catch up to you eventually. Not until Simba's grown and then he reunites with Nala. Which, that's tragic too, because Nala all this time thought that Simba was dead. That's so awful. And poor Sarabi, losing Mufasa ends thinking she lost Simba this whole time. Oh, it's so tragic. Oh, and that reminds me, just this most recent viewing, I like noticing new things. When you've seen something so many times, when you notice new things, it's just like a small joy. I love that. And one little thing I noticed was Zazu comforting Sarabi in that scene when poor little Nala's crying, and then Zazu lays his wing on Sarabi's paw. That's so sweet, just to comfort her. The other thing too that I noticed on a recent viewing, when I watched it on the plane actually, was when they're at the elephant graveyard and then when Zazu shows up and then he's protecting Simba and Nala with his wings. That's so cute too. Zazu is as loyal as they come, even though he's just, to them, just this annoying hornbill, because he's the authoritative fatherly figure in a sense, the mentor, just kind of ruining their fun, but he'll stop at nothing to protect all of them because he was just so loyal to Mufasa. And then once Scar gets in power, he's really just kind of laying around and just not doing anything. Zazu is in that little cage made of an animal carcass. And he's singing, "It's a small world after all." No, anything but that. Which reminds me, I've seen the Broadway musical adaptation of The Lion King a few years ago with my friend. We had great seats, but it was a faithful adaptation. It was basically the movie verbatim, but they added a few other scenes here and there. They added the song "He Lives in You" from the sequel, but apparently that song was originally written for this movie, I believe, but then it wasn't used until the sequel. But anyway, so that's in the musical. There's also a scene that was originally going to be in this movie that thankfully was cut because it's just so oof, which was a scene that was in the musical, though, where Scar tries to make Nala his queen. That's just so, ew. No. Creepy. But the musical is just absolutely wonderful. And Rafiki is played by a woman. That's cool, too. Rafiki, too, is just such a mystical character. He's just so wise and all-knowing. His connection with Mufasa and with Simba. And when he paints on the mane, that imagery is so iconic, too, for Simba. When he's all joyful, realizing that Simba's alive. And he just takes those feathers and leaves and knows Simba's alive. It's just so random. But back to the musical. The stampede scene was done really well. This wall of the wildebeest coming towards Simba. Oh, it was so cool. And they added a scene with Timon just getting caught and dangling from a river. It was kind of bizarre. And they had the actor on stage and then just him working this puppet, basically, moving the puppet with his arms and legs in front of him. So it was kind of like a life-size Timon puppet. It was really cool. It was very well done. And then back to the movie, you got "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" by Elton John. Beautiful song. And I remember I actually saw this movie in theaters several years ago. It was in 2011. I was in college, and that's when they released it randomly in 3D. So I saw it with a few of my friends. We went to a late night showing of it. It was so much fun, and we were singing along to all the songs. So that was so much fun, just belting out Hakuna Matata and all the songs. But the 3D was just pointless, but it was so fun to see it in theaters though, because when this movie came out, I was too young to have seen it in theaters, but we had the old VHS. We'd watch it over and over and over, because how could you not? It never gets old. Then the scene with Rafiki when he literally knocks sense into Simba. He's saying, "How, what'd you do that for?" He hits him with his stick. He's saying, "It doesn't matter, it's in the past." "Yeah, but it still hurts." "Ah, yes, the past can hurt. But the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it." And then he ducks. So that's a great way to teach him that lesson. Literally learn from the past. And Mufasa's spirit guiding Simba, telling him, "Remember who you are." It's beautiful. And then when he goes and defeats Scar. And Scar just lies about everything. Thank God the hyenas then realized how terrible he is and just his fate is sealed then. because most of the Disney villains, they do end up dying. They pretty much all do. Except for Jafar, I'm just realizing. And with this movie, I love that song, This Land. Such gorgeous music. Oh my gosh, so majestic when Simba takes his place as king of Pride Rock and the roar. So powerful. Absolutely love it. And I did see the remake. I was excited to see it, I'll be honest. Even though hearing everything about it on the internet, I have to say, people on the internet, it's like everyone just looks for a reason to hate something. And yes, I was skeptical about the idea of a CGI remake. And yes, going into it, I was having low expectations. But I was curious to see it. I just wanted to see it, and I'm happy I did. I genuinely enjoyed it. I thought the vocal performances from the new cast were fantastic. Of course, I still got James Earl Jones as Mufasa, and it was just cool to hear those same iconic lines from Mufasa, just with a different delivery from James Earl Jones. That was interesting. And this new version was directed by Jon Favreau, who also directed the Jungle Book, the live-action Jungle Book, which I haven't seen, but I heard it was really good. He also directed Elf. But overall, I would say the remake was well done. Of course, it doesn't need to exist because the original is a masterpiece, but it exists and I'm happy it does. And it stays faithful to the original, obviously, in terms of the story, the dialogue. There are new updates here and there. And then, of course, the whole thing with this is that they wanted it to look photorealistic. And people were really dragging it, comparing it to the original and how this wasn't going to be emotional. I will say there were certain parts where it didn't quite hit emotionally because of the animals looking realistic and how in the animated they're more expressive since it's anthropomorphic animals. But this one still made me emotional. Maybe part of it was nostalgia, but I still got emotional during a few parts, actually. And Circle of Life, what was interesting was that first it was just still for a few seconds before the orange sun was rising. That was cool. And then there were certain things. Instead of Rafiki and Mufasa hugging, Rafiki just touched his face kind of above his nose, between his eyes, just kind of tapping his head. They still do the purring, nuzzling. You see baby Simba, just the cutest thing ever. Oh my gosh. There's a longer sequence then with the mouse at the beginning before Scar is going to kill it. I still found Scar intimidating and dreary, but not as iconic as the original, but still really good. I always love Zazu. I especially love Zazu because now in this one he's voiced by John Oliver. I love John Oliver. I love Last Week Tonight. That's actually one of the rare shows too. I've been watching it since the beginning, since it premiered back in 2014. It's in its 6th season now, but he actually said at one point on that show something about how if anyone ever compares you to a cartoon character, you might as well lean into it. And then here's a picture of him and Zazu saying, there you go. There's a part when he's giving the news report too, like in the original. But I found that I laughed because it just reminded me of his whole Last Week Tonight bit. He's like, oh yeah, we get it, whatever. It was funny to me. Then there's one part too where he's flying around. He's like, oh wait, I see something approaching. Oh, no, wait, that's just my shadow. False alarm. And Just Can't Wait to Be King was fun. It was kind of like the animals helping out Simba and Nala. And then it was just by chance, kind of, that they were able to distract Zazu with the buzzards swarming around him. Be Prepared, though, was very muted. It was just nowhere near as epic and sinister as the original. It was just kind of a few verses. And it sounded good. It's just too bad it wasn't the whole song. And apparently it wasn't even in it originally and they had to go and add it. Because how could you not have the song? So at least it was in it. It just wasn't the full song, though. It was just kind of quick. Couple of verses. There was also a running gag with the hyenas. I know one was voiced by Keegan-Michael Key. Another was voiced by Eric Andre. So there was a running gag where the one of them, I guess it was supposed to be Ed, where he just kept invading the other one's personal space. He's like, seriously, can you give me some space? And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry. Then he got off the rock and just went up on the other side of the rock right next to him. That was interesting. There was a part, too, where Zazu said to Mufasa, like, oh, I remember a young lion. He grew up to prosper, didn't he, sire? And he was talking about him. So that means Zazu was around since Mufasa was a cub. So that's interesting to think about, too. And they still had the part with Simba stepping into the paw print. And then a lot of the same musical cues, too, with the stampede scene. And I will say, this scene by far was weaker emotionally than the original, because, I mean, it was still in the voice actor's voice, him all upset. And he did a great job as young Simba, but just because you can't have lions crying with this photorealistic look, so it just didn't kind of hit. And yet I still cried because I just get emotional, but it's still sad and everything. And also Scar was just so relentless, saying, oh, this is how you repay him. He just wanted to see you do well in life, and this is how you repay him by killing him. So terrible, making Simba really feel awful about it. There was an extra little scene, too, between Mufasa and Simba, where he's saying, Simba, come to me, son, with him on the branch. A little bit more of dialogue there. And then still Simba running away, and then with the vultures, and then Timon and Pumbaa showing up. So in the remake, you see them coming towards you from far off on screen. In the original, they're off screen, and they just come barreling into the scene, just charging in. So Timon is voiced by Billy Eichner, and I love Billy on the Street, that whole shtick, I love that. And Pumbaa is voiced by Seth Rogen. And they recorded their lines together, which, thank goodness, because you need that rapport between Timon and Pumbaa. And they had a great rapport, the two of them. I liked their whole dynamic as well. I liked Billy's interpretation of Timon. I thought it was great. And Seth Rogen as Pumbaa, too. I liked both. What was interesting, though, was that in the original, they're really just outcasts. They just have each other. In this one, they had just kind of all these other animal friends, all these other fellow prey. There was an anteater, a chinchilla, and then the whole part still with Simba saying, are there any zebra? Any antelope? And then there's an antelope saying, uh-oh. That was cute. And then they did the whole Hakuna Matata. And then the part two with, I got downhearted every time that I farted. Aren't you going to stop me? No, you disgust me. That was great. So Billy Eichner. So his personality was great. And then after the whole song, when now adult Simba, voiced by Donald Glover, and then some meta humor. I always love meta humor. When they sing, oh, let's sing it again. And he's like, no, let's not. I think we want to leave him wanting more. Besides, you've gained 400 pounds since we started singing. Meanwhile, I've stayed exactly the same. I love that, which is true. Which, when you think about it, I mean, in the original, because they're cartoon characters, but Timon and Pumbaa, they stay the same age from when Simba, like, they look exactly the same, Timon, Pumbaa, and also, really, Zazu as well. They're exactly the same from when Simba is born to when Simba and Nala's daughter is grown. Which made me wonder about lifespans for these types of animals, so I looked it up because I was curious. And a lifespan for a meerkat is 12 to 14 years. For a warthog, it's 7 to 11 years. For a lion, it's 10 to 14 years. And hornbills, 50 years. But I mean, I know it's cartoons. They're talking animals. I can suspend my disbelief with that, but just found that interesting. And what's interesting with the remake, too, that Timon and Pumbaa have this whole weird existential discussion with Simba. How they're talking about time is a straight, meaningless line. You just keep walking towards it till the end, and then that's it. I was like, my goodness, that's kind of a little bleak for a Disney movie. And it straight up reminded me of Time's arrow from BoJack Horseman. Time neither stands still nor goes backwards, and merely marches forward. When BoJack's mom's father told her that. But I digress. But it reminds me of that. And other subtle things, other subtle differences I liked. I liked when Simba, Timon, and Pumbaa were looking up at the stars, that whole scene. And in the original, they're just lying on the grass, the three of them. And in this one, they were all snuggled up together. I found that very, very adorable. Oh, and also what I found adorable was during Hakuna Matata, when I was a young warthog, and they show baby Pumbaa, and it was so cute. And they show him farting, too, because here we are, 2019, show the character farting on screen, because apparently Pumbaa is the first Disney character to fart. These are the Disney trivia facts you need to know, obviously. And then in this one, Rafiki realizes Simba's alive because of a tuft of his fur just gets carried in the wind. And all these animals it goes through until it ends up with a little ant, and then he picks up the fur and he knows that it's Simba. And the other difference, too, was that in this remake, Scar wants Sarabi to be his queen. So that was just interesting to me, too. But of course, Sarabi refuses. Then he says, well, fine, then the hyenas eat first. And then Can You Feel Love Tonight was lovely, too. Everyone was upset that it takes place during the day, but it was just still so cute with Donald Glover and the one and only Beyonce, and it sounded beautiful. And they still have the part with Nala licking Simba like it's a kiss, so cute. And then there was a new song by Beyonce called Spirit when Simba's running back to Pride Rock. And then when they have to distract the hyenas with the original, it's, what do you want me to do? Dress and drag and do the hula? I was hoping that would be in, but actually what they did instead I really liked. All of a sudden Timon is saying, Monsieur, mademoiselle, it is with greatest pride and deepest pleasure that I welcome you tonight. I was like, oh, be our guest, I'm into it, yeah. And he was about to sing, and then they just run off screaming. What was also funny, too, was when they first see Simba, that just reminded me, then Pumbaa's like, oh, can we keep him? He's like, fine, we can keep him. It's like, oh, we're gonna name him Fred. I was like, that's so random, but that was hilarious. And then it's just more or less the same, and then with Simba roaring at the end, all of them roaring. Still that lightning strike and setting the branch on fire, and then the hyenas attacking Scar. And then when Zazu bows at the end, he says, Your Majesty. That was nice, too. Also, when you just get all nervous and frantic, and his feathers would flare out. So yeah, obviously with photorealistic animals, you can't be as expressive, but with the vocal performance, all the emotion still shines through. So it was really well done. A faithful retelling of the story that we know and love from the original. And I really enjoyed it. So I would recommend it, I will say. If you're a huge fan of The Lion King, I will recommend checking out the remake. It was well done. You could tell everyone who contributed to this movie have a great love for the original, but then they made it their own. So it was very well done. And then moving on to Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, which was released on video in 1998, 4 years after the original. And there were so many direct-to-video Disney sequels. This one, to me, is one of the better ones in terms of the story, and I really like the songs in this one, too. I think the animation is still really good as well. The original, obviously, it's a higher budget. It's much more epic and grand in terms of scope. But the sequel, for what it is, a direct-to-video sequel, it's really good, I think. And I remember my brother and sister just really, really loved this movie. For me, I was kind of over it after a few watches of it, but they just were obsessed with this sequel. They would watch it repeatedly. With this one, it's just kind of a Romeo and Juliet type story with Simba and Nala's daughter, Kiara. And then it's not Scar's son, but it's Scar's protege, Kovu. And so it's kind of like warring families, and the two of them fall in love, just like Romeo and Juliet. But what's great about this movie, too, is that how it's talking about prejudice and racism, with these lions being outsiders and then learning to accept them with that message of we are one. That's lovely. And this one, it opens with He Lives in You. We see baby Kiara and Timon and Pumbaa talking about how they're excited to raise him. It's like, actually, it's a girl. Oh, girl! It's cute. I love the song We Are One. It's just such a lovely song. We are one, you and I, we are like the earth and sky. It's beautiful. I love the lyrics. And then the main villain in this one is Zira. And then she's got Vitani, Nuka, and Kovu, her children. And Nuka is voiced by Andy Dick. Like, oh my goodness, freaking Andy Dick. That's wild. And he also voiced Monkey Man in Hey Arnold, so that's just so hilarious. I remember my siblings loved that part when they're doing the fire, and he's like, roasty toasty princess. Oh my goodness. It's like, hey, you smell something burning, whatever. But yeah, she sings that song, My Lullaby. And that's the whole thing. So, with the message in this movie, how she's teaching him to have hatred in his heart against Simba because she wants to avenge Scar, Zira. And so then she just decides to use Kovu to get to the daughter so then he can get to Simba and kill Simba. But then, of course, he ends up falling in love with Kiara, and she loves him. And he teaches her how to be more of a hunter, and she teaches him how to have more fun. So it's so cute. And I love Upendi, in Upendi, with Rafiki playing matchmaker. Rafiki's so joyful and crazy. His craziness is kind of just reminding me of the remake. Not as prominent in the remake. It's just so, in the original, just so a part of his character. He's just this crazy yet wise old mystical monkey that just seems to know everything, and this omniscient all-knowing monkey. But him as matchmaker, and it's cute. Upendi, that's a cute song. But then Simba thinks that Kovu betrayed them, but really Kovu doesn't want to kill Simba the way Zira wants him to because he loves Kiara. And then poor Nuka ends up dying. That's so sad too because he just wants to impress his mom. He's like, I'll do it, mother. It's like, oh, and then poor Nuka. He's like, I tried. Oh, it's so sad. And the part with Zira's death too, which you may already know this if you're a big Disney fan, but originally Zira's death was a suicide where Kiara was going to help her, just reaching for her paw to help her, and then Zira would say no, never. And that's why, and you can notice it, that when she's falling, she's smiling because she purposely didn't want to be saved by Kiara. But then they deemed that too dark, which that is. So then it was just her accidentally slipping and falling to her death. Oh, but also a couple of the other songs. There's that song, Not One of Us. My siblings and I loved that for some reason. Just deception, disgrace. They absolutely loved that. I don't know. I mean, I loved it too, but like my brother and sister just really, really loved this movie so much. I don't know what it was about it, but wow. But when they're banishing Kovu, and then when Kovu and Kiara reunite with Love Will Find a Way, and then they look at the reflection and say, hey, look, we are one. And then when Kiara just tells her dad, what do you see? What differences do you see between them and the other lions? That they are one. I love Timon and Pumbaa's little, I love moments like this. Yeah, love. Not like love. Because when they had said that earlier in the movie about the bugs, like, oh, I love these. Not like love. That's cute. And then speaking of Timon and Pumbaa, if you haven't seen The Lion King 1.5, which was released in 2004, if you haven't seen it in a long time or just haven't seen it at all, if you're a big fan of The Lion King and especially of Timon and Pumbaa, I highly recommend it. It's just such a fun movie. And this movie too we would watch a lot, my siblings and I. It's basically, it's not a sequel, it's not a prequel, it's an in-between-quel. Is that a thing? Where it's basically the retelling of The Lion King from Timon and Pumbaa's perspective. Specifically more Timon's perspective, really. This is really more Timon's movie, and I realize that only now, watching it. I haven't seen this movie in a long time, so rewatching it now, it was fun to revisit. Because it's basically Timon's hero's journey. What's fun about this movie is that there's a framing device with Timon and Pumbaa sitting in a theater or wherever they are, and you just see their silhouettes, and they're sitting and watching the movie. So every once in a while they pause it and they have their little comments. So that's cute, just to inject more humor into the movie and more of their banter. And instead of when I was a young warthog, we have when I was a young meerkat. So then they go back and we meet Timon's fellow meerkats. And I love this song, Dig a Tunnel. Dig a tunnel, dig a tunnel. What was that? Quick before the hyenas come. It's a fun song. I like it. But even with the opening of this movie real quick, though, too, where it still starts with Circle of Life, and then all of a sudden Timon singing, "What's on the menu?" Which is like, dear God, his screeching voice. But then they go way, way back. And it's just a reverse from Pride Rock, just pulling the camera back all the way back to where Timon lives with his fellow meerkats, them digging tunnels. And we meet his mom, voiced by Julie Kavner, who's the voice of Marge Simpson, and his uncle Max, who's voiced by Jerry Stiller, which I just learned that, who is, most notably to me, he is Frank Costanza from Seinfeld, so that's funny. And just how Timon just doesn't fit in with the fellow meerkats when he accidentally destroys the entire tunnel they had all built. And then there's that symbolism with the mom keeps smoothing down his hair. It's like, I know you'll find somewhere you'll fit in. Then she smooths down his hair, and then just a little strand sticks up, like he doesn't belong with them. And then he dreams about wanting this new home for himself. And then Rafiki's the one who tells him about Hakuna Matata, that it means no worries, and that to find what he's looking for, he needs to look beyond what you see. So that Timon starts to do that, and he's like, okay, beyond what I see, and the music's swelling. He's like, it's kind of hard to think with all this music. I love meta jokes, as I said. I remember we also loved the part where when he decides to go off on his own, and then they hug, and it's just so cute. She's like squishing him to death, and he's like, Ma, I gotta go. And then she's like, oh, my Timmies. And when he's walking away, and she's just like, make sure you watch behind you. He's like, I know, Ma. Don't talk to strangers. I know, Ma. And then she's saying something else. He's like, what? Goodbye, Ma. My siblings and I loved that. We found that absolutely hilarious. And then when Timon and Pumbaa meet, they're just screaming, terrified. But then Timon wants Pumbaa to stick with him because he can ward off predators. So then, just how Timon and Pumbaa affect everything in The Lion King. It was just clever. I mean, it works on its own, but it's kind of like how they had to figure out ways to fit them into the story. So with this, when Pumbaa farts and then some of the animals start going down, then they're like, oh, they're bowing, we should bow too. So they're all bowing, like in the beginning with Circle of Life. Which this doesn't really match with the timeline, because then when they go to sleep, Pumbaa's saying he made the 2 beds, and then Timon just goes into the big bed, and then Pumbaa just takes the little bed. Kind of Timon, you see him, how he takes advantage of Pumbaa a little bit. Pumbaa's dumbness and his eagerness, poor Pumbaa. But then when they wake up, so that's apparently supposed to be the same night, but then when they wake up, and then it's just can't wait to be king, even though that's when Simba's a little older, obviously. But then when he's like saying, oh, we're in the theater district, and he just pokes at the animals, so then Timon apparently is the reason that they all fall. And then as they still are looking for a place to live, and then they're in the cave with the geyser. It's like, oh, steam is good, and then it's be prepared. And then they get involved with the stampede, and they go down the waterfall. And then Timon's saying, oh, that's it, and I just go home. It's like, what, you mean you're all alone in this big, crazy, lonely world? And then Pumbaa looks at him, he's all sad, so Pumbaa is all alone, apparently. He doesn't have a family. We don't really know much about his backstory, but just he's all alone. And Timon's saying, well, to be honest, I'm all alone too. And then he says, well, we're friends, and friends stick by each other till the end. So that's a sweet moment between them. And then, of course, when they meet Simba, and then there's the whole sequence with them parenting Simba, which it is interesting to think about how Timon and Pumbaa basically raised Simba. Then there's that meta joke, too, when they're going back and forth on the log, and then Timon says, we're going to get old walking across this thing. And Simba literally does grow up walking across that log. He's also ranting a part with Timon and Pumbaa eating a worm, Lady and the Tramp style. My siblings and I also loved the part where Timon is trying to remember the phrase Hakuna Matata, and he's saying, oh, it's such a wonderful phrase that has such a nice rhythm to it. And then Pumbaa keeps saying all these phrases that rhyme with Hakuna Matata. And then at one point he says, this ought to be hada. And he's like, I got a lambada. And then he knocks into Timon. Timon's screaming at him. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. And he says, Hakuna Matata. And then my siblings and I loved also the part where Timon's like, we got to make them not feel the love tonight. And they're just trying to prevent Simba and Nala from falling in love, but then it just ends up being more romantic each time. And then what was clever too, when as they're singing, and if he falls in love tonight. So in The Lion King 1.5, then we see it from them looking out, just a different perspective as they're singing, just the backs of them, and then just what they see with Simba and Nala cuddling and walking away. And that was clever. And then when Simba has to finally go back and defeat Scar, and then Nala goes to help, and Pumbaa's saying, we gotta go help him. He's like, no, I got everything I want right here. It's like, what happens if friends stick to the end? And Pumbaa says, I was going to ask you the same thing. And Timon being selfish, but he just decides to stay there, and Pumbaa just goes off without him, disappointed. And then Rafiki shows up. Rafiki, always when characters are in times of crisis or when they're finally in need of wisdom. And then Timon's like, wait, don't tell me. And just like says everything for him. I liked that. Then he has his realization, oh, my Hakuna Matata went with them. And Rafiki just nods. And he's like, I'm glad we had this talk. Which that doesn't really line up, though, that he knew Rafiki, because in the original he's saying, who's the monkey? But anyway. Then when Pumbaa's running in the desert, like in the original Simba running through the desert, but then with this Pumbaa, then Timon just runs past him, and then when they pause the movie and Timon's like, what was with the running? And Pumbaa says, I was waiting for you to catch up. And he's like, aw, that's cute. And then Timon basically, he saves the day when his mom and his Uncle Max show up again, and then they want to help Simba and want to get rid of the hyenas, and then they dig the tunnel and they're distracting the hyenas, and there's randomly Timon proposing to Shenzi, which is just so bizarre. He's like, Shenzi Maria Jacquelina Hyena. It's just so bizarre. Will you marry me? And then when they finally knock over the sticks, but it doesn't work, and then Timon goes in and he knocks over the sticks, and then finally the ground breaks under the hyenas. And then that's when Scar is thrown over the cliff, and when the hyenas go to attack Scar. And the mom is so proud of him, and then she goes to fix his hair again, and then she's like, oh, like she's stopping herself, and then he just says, you missed a spot, so that was cute. So Timon showing growth. And then at the very end, Timon's mom shows up saying, oh, you watched the movie? And then, Uncle Max, we're gonna watch the movie. And Pumbaa's like, oh yeah, let's watch it again. And then all of a sudden, Mickey Mouse shows up, and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs show up, and the Genie and Princess Jasmine and Aladdin and Peter Pan and a few other Disney characters. And it's just their silhouettes, which reminds me of something I heard somewhere, that you want cartoon characters to be so distinct that you can even recognize them in silhouette form. That's definitely true of all these iconic Disney characters. So this is just such a fun movie. And Lion King is just an absolute masterpiece. I wouldn't be surprised, too, if the Lion King remake, if we got a sequel for it. I would not be surprised at all. That'd be interesting, too, to see Kiara and Kovu and just to retell that story with the photorealistic technology. But gotta love Lion King. Incredible characters, as I said, absolutely amazing, iconic music, and just a heartwarming story. Hakuna Matata. And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com, or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, so if you ever want to hear a whole bunch of people's opinions about the right way to have a wedding, the best thing to do is to tell people you're getting married, and then I guarantee you will be up to your armpits in other people's opinions. I will be discussing a short story called A Most Blessed and Auspicious Occasion, from a book of short stories called Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory by Raphael Bob Waxberg. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.